It's Dina and Adam Klasfeld from All Rise News, and we are just breaking this down. We have the reporting that Trump got like a partial victory. He wants to try to claim complete victory, but he got a partial victory in that civil fraud case against him having to do with the Trump organization. The court ruled that the amount was excessive, but he didn't get the full vindication, despite the fact that he's out there posting that somehow he got vindicated. But Adam, which is so cool that you're a contributor here, because your reporting is amazing. And you were in that courtroom. And so sometimes I feel like the most important thing with covering Trump is to not let his lie be the last thing that hangs out there. And the fact is, he was declared a fraud. He was declared a liar. And this ruling did not take that away. Yes, it's still ongoing. It might at some point, but for today, it didn't. And so I just want you to kind of, since you were there, just kind of remind us again, like the worst lies that came up in that trial that you felt like really swayed the judge. This was a bench trial. It wasn't a jury trial. It swayed the judge to convict him, or the Trump org, of fraud.
Thank you for having me, Dina. I did attend every day of Trump's civil fraud trial. And this was very often during it. One thing to remember about it, it was a bench trial. It was before the judge alone. And we had a testimony from Trump himself, from his children. And we went into years of Trump's statements of financial condition. Now, this is the heart of the case. The statements of financial condition were, according to the evidence put forward by the Attorney General of the state of New York, Letitia James, inflated his assets over and over again to get favorable terms on loans from banks like Deutsche Bank, that he would, to rank high on the Forbes list of billionaires, he would want his net worth to seem as high as possible. And here's some of the evidence that came out during the trial. The trial showed one of the most famous examples was Trump Tower, the size of the Trump Tower triplex. And during that trial, one of the things that came out is that he estimated the physical size of the triplex as 3 times larger than it was. And how do we know this wasn't an inadvertent mistake, as one of the judges in the ruling insisted that it was? Well, during the trial, it came out that at some point, Forbes called him out on the size of the apartment and said Trump has been lying about the size of his triplex. After that coverage, the size was corrected, but the rate of per square foot, the value of it, was increased, which kind of showed a knowledge. There are other examples. People talk about Mar-a-Lago, and it was a controversy during the trial itself that Mar-a-Lago was undervalued, according to Trump, by the court. They said, oh, how could the court estimate the value at this rate when it was actually worth so much more? Well, what came out at trial is that when he bought Mar-a-Lago, in order to accord with the history of it and accord with the intended use of the historic nature of that property, he had to agree to certain land use restrictions. And that land use restriction forced him to use it as a private club. So you have these things time and again, and the assistant to the Attorney General during the trial called it the as-if value. Let's value Mar-a-Lago as if it were totally unrestricted. You could use it for whatever purpose, in which case, yeah, it'd be worth a lot more. It's in a very desirable area. And the as-if value of the Trump Tower triplex, it will value it as if it were 3 times its size. Another example was Trump Park Avenue. The as-if value there was, we have a bunch of rent-stabilized apartments. What if they weren't that? Then we could be making this much money. And that was some of the evidence that came out time and again at trial. But and this is a kind of bottom line here. This turns out to be a major victory for Trump, because one of the things that the courts did today is that they overturned the disgorgement penalty. And that means the only monetary penalty against Trump was disgorgement. So he had a penalty of nearly $500 million, and more than that if you count post-judgment interest. Now it's down to zero. However, as you noted, Dina, the judgment itself stands. There was some very complicated kind of arguments within the judges about there without a clear majority as to who would affirm what. But they ultimately decided, four of the judges ultimately decided to send it up to the Court of Appeals. And the majority of the judges did not ultimately take issue with those findings. The two judges that actually commented on the merits of the findings said, this is supported by the evidence. Tish James had the authority under the executive law that she used to do this, and she had the authority to uphold the integrity of the markets. That's exactly what the lower court found, Judge Engoron. And one of the things that was very notable during this trial were constant attacks on the judiciary, on Justice Engoron, lower court judges. You remember this very much, Dina. Throughout it, there were attacks on not only the judge, but the judge's law clerk, and on the family. And there were threats.
Yeah, I mean, it was a disaster for sure. I mean, but to your point, like if the judges ultimately, when this gets appealed, well, it has been appealed, but to the highest court in the state of New York, if they decide to have a new trial, Trump can sit for that trial. Let's just be clear, because this is private conduct. This isn't presidential conduct. He won't be able to, How was he on the witness stand? I don't think I have spoken to somebody who has seen him testify kind of in real time.
Right. Well, it was very interesting because he went on the witness stand and attacked the entire process. And it very much went off the rails. It was a question of, is Justice Engoron going to stop this? There were, as I recall, it's been some time now, but I recall the judge actually raising a question about whether he was going to stop the whole thing, because when he was questioned whether the answers were responsive. I mean, it was just him inveighing against the whole process and about how insulting the value was on Mar-a-Lago, and how everyone thinks that this was a total sham. So this was an entire thumbing his nose at the process. And now that he's back in the White House again, this is grist for the mill of this retribution campaign. Of course, he's already saying that this is total vindication, that this shows a politicization of the entire process, that the case shouldn't have been brought. That wasn't the finding of the ruling. One of the five judges actually had a adjacent ruling to that, but that very much a minority view on that panel. There were two judges who thought maybe there should be a new trial to determine the issues of liability that they didn't comment on. And two of them said, this record shows that these are well supported findings of fraud.
And just to make the point, our civil law is definitely more my area. Jury amounts that juries award, or, in this case, the judge, they get changed all the time at the appellate level, all the time. So this is not anything too out of the ordinary that you would have like a disgorgement, a penalty, let's say a damages award, not quite the same thing, but a little bit similar to the same thing, get modified down by the appellate, because it is usually true that the jury, or in this case, the judge who hears the facts, and he saw him testify, he saw him lie, he saw him be so flagrant to the justice system, then he is going to impose a penalty that kind of reflects that. And jurors do that too. They're like really upset when somebody seems like they're lying on the witness stand, right? Or did something they thought was so egregious. But then when the appellate court looks at it, they say, well, in terms of like the actual damages somebody suffered, and they kind of take the emotion out of it a little bit and often get revised down. So this is not a win for Trump. We're just going to reiterate it again. Adam and I are here to reiterate it again. It is not a win. This happens, I don't want to say frequently, but this is not that uncommon. He, at the end of the day, is still determined to be a fraudster in so many ways, criminally, civilly. And, yes, he can still, like any other person in America, continue his appeals, but he has still found to have lied and cheated and done it so many ways to the American people, and continue to do it so many ways to the American people. So any last words, Adam? I know we're going to sign off. You and I will do another duet because there's so many news coming up. And if, for those of you who haven't subscribed, we're on the Legal AF channel. All Rise has joined. It's fantastic getting a chance to talk to you, Adam. So subscribe so you get to hear all of the other kind of major news as we're breaking it down.
Thank you very much. A couple of points on this. One of the things that made this reduction of the penalty so dramatic is that it was disgorgement. The penalty was disgorgement of ill-gotten gains. And what that means is you just can't keep the money that you got through fraud. And this was a case where we had actions that had to do with, for example, submitting these inflated statements to Deutsche Bank. And they would give favorable rates to billionaires who were 2.5 billionaires, but not two billionaires.
Yeah. Right.
And so how much did he gain from that favorable rate? So that sort of dramatic, when they have decided to eliminate disgorgement, it goes from 500 million to zero. The other point that I will mention, and kind of ties a bow on one of the things you were saying, Dina, is that among all of the MAGA world reactions to the stunning victory by Trump was Alina Habba. Talking about how this shows this was a politicized scam from the start, and saying things that were never in the ruling. Well, funny enough, later in the day, a federal judge found that Alina Habba, who was Trump's attorney in this civil fraud case, was appointed unlawfully to serve as a federal prosecutor for the District of New Jersey. So in the same day the same day that she's misleading people about the nature of this appellate victory, she loses her job in the District of New Jersey because she was unlawfully appointed, and it goes back up to the case continues. This will go to the highest court in the state of New York, the Court of Appeals, and they will reconsider all of the things that we've been talking about.
Well, we're going to be here to break it all down. I'm glad Alina Habba, that was the right decision there. And perhaps somebody will report her to the bar. Lawyers do have professional standards, and she should not be lying about a verdict. That's a very clear ethical violation. So, so glad you could join us for this, and we will do more.
Always a pleasure, Dina. Looking forward to the next time.